next year, but
I know.
did they do a hybrid online option for their boarding school?
For last year,
Yeah.
the whole school went online. So
Okay.
it was, yep, the campus was closed and everything was online. So we made it.
Well, so do any of you have any great quarantine tips, stories, things you did besides just survive? Because I think that's the best one of all. But or things you were reading or what you watched. What helped you with your we can't do the normal?
We've been watching shows that they've been wanting to watch forever. So lots of Netflix, lots of Minecraft, lots of, staying up late and sleeping in. We have a bucket list that they've been slowly trying to check off the list of things they want to make and things they want to do. So
Yes, I love that. So you just like made a list and hung it up and then you,
yep.
That's so great.
Yep.
Madonna, what about you?
Well, I'm living in Taiwan and we're pretty much been back to normal for the last 3 months. I mean,
That's right.
Back in January, we had, they shut down, the Taiwanese local school shut down 2 weeks right after Chinese New Year. So instead of having like a 3 or 4 week break, they had like a 6 or 7 week break. So our middle child goes to a Taiwanese school. So that's the only time she had quarantine time, but it wasn't really quarantined. It was just stay home, don't go to school, and everyone wear masks and wash your hands and take temperatures everywhere. But there was no mandatory stay at home, don't go out of the house. We never had that. So I feel like we live in Disneyland.
Yeah, well, and better than Disneyland because they are not doing well with that right now.
No. So anyway, yeah, it's just been crazy. We've been going to the beach and now we don't have to wear masks only when we go to the hospital or public transportation. Other than that, there's no mask requirements. And yeah, so I feel like I'm getting ready to take my son to the States for university. He also graduated this year, so he's had a very strange year. And I'm a little bit I wouldn't say nervous, but I think I'm going to forget a lot of, oh yeah, you guys are still in, yeah.
Yeah. And Taiwan,
The mindset.
Taiwan's done really well about keeping the cases down. Everything.
Yeah, I think they closed the borders early, and then anyone who did come in they had to be quarantined. And then anyone who, if they did have it, anyone in their family had to be quarantined. They just really were real watchful of where people were coming and going and where they were seeing pockets of activity. So I think they did a really good job. I've been very thankful to be here.
So it doesn't affect, with the EU not letting US citizens travel through, does that affect you or them at all since you're coming from Taiwan?
No, I think because I have a residency card, so going back and forth hasn't been a problem. Most people are not traveling. They're staying on the island because of when you do come back, there is a 2-week quarantine, 14 days mandatory. If you've left the island, you have to do that. So most families are not.
They're just not going to do that. Yeah.
But my son's school is still going to do face-to-face this fall. So we decided he'll go back, but I'm going to go with just me, not the rest of the family, because of the quarantining. We just thought that's too much for the other 2 girls to have to do that.
Absolutely. Well, we just want to say hello and welcome you all if you're joining us for this Facebook Live. We're really excited to be able to offer this to you today. I was talking to these ladies earlier. I said, I feel like if we were at a coffee shop, we could just sit and talk for hours about this. Everybody has a story about navigating medical needs overseas. And so I'm just looking forward to chatting with you all. And we hope that if you're joining us on Facebook, that you are thinking of those questions or those things that you were hoping we would be able to touch base on today. And please feel free to put those in the comments. Sarah, wave at everybody. Sarah is going to be watching those comments, and I'm going to introduce who we have today. And if you have a question for any of them, please feel free to put that in the comments and Sarah's going to get that to us. We can't see your comments, but Sarah's going to be our eyes for us on that today. So, so I'm Denise Beck. I'm the executive director of Velvet Ashes, and we are just excited to be your connection to community and to resources. And we just felt like this summer has a lot of weird stuff happening. And one thing that we always have a need for is to communicate, to connect. And this is just one way we thought, let's do this. Let's just get face-to-face time. Zoom is the thing. Everybody can do it now. So let's just chat about the things that are affecting us, that are weighing on our hearts. And one of those things in any season is navigating medical needs, whether those are small or whether those are large. It affects your decision to be where you are. If you can continue to be where you are, how do you navigate being where you are? And so any confidence or help we can give you in feeling confident about making those decisions, we feel like is going to extend the impact that you're having. So I'm going to be here just kind of helping navigate that conversation. I have lived in Uganda and South Sudan, where we found it very challenging and had to navigate several things to try to put together and meet the needs for my family. Joining us today, I mentioned Sarah. Sarah, tell us a little bit about where you served and all of that as well. Sarah is our program coordinator here at Velvet Ashes.
Yes, I am excited to hang out with you guys in the comments today. So as Denise said, feel free to add your questions or thoughts as we go along. I served in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, for 5 years and have been back in my passport country in the US for about a year and a half. And I'm sure we all have our medical stories. I had to have surgery overseas and dealt with pneumonia when I was about 6 hours away from a hospital. So yeah, we all have those stories that we could share. And I'm excited just to be able to dive into this topic today with you all.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Madonna, give us a wave and just kind of introduce us. Tell us where you're at and how you're connected to this topic and to Velvet Ashes.
Hi, well, I lived in China for a while and now I'm in Taiwan. And so I've been in Asia for about a little over 20 years. And so connected with Velvet Ashes, I've been one of the facilitator coordinators that they have, connection groups. And then I've been a guest writer. But my reason why I'm interested in this topic is because about 17 years ago, my daughter was, we were in rural China in the middle, and she was diagnosed with pneumonia, really bad case. And we had to have an emergency evacuation out of the city. And then later on realized she was diagnosed with, and I don't speak French. So anyone who's out there who does speak French, please forgive me, but Cul-de-Chat syndrome, which is the cat's cry syndrome, because it's a deletion of one of the chromosomes. And so it causes pretty severe mental disabilities. And she had to have a feeding tube put in. And so when we found all of this out when she was about 10 months old in the US, we had gone back there to do all this. And we would just remember that we were ready to move to the States because we thought that's probably what we needed to do. But just every therapist we talked to and the doctor and the surgeon and everyone said, no, go back. There's no reason for you to stay in America, which really surprised my husband and I. So we did go back for 2 years. And then she was about 2 when she started really banging her head because she needed to communicate better. And we'd been going to Hong Kong every 3 months or something for therapy. And so then we moved to Taiwan because we could get some English therapy. So long story there, but that's really why I'm interested in this topic, because I see more and more families that are coming onto the field, moving overseas that have kids with special needs, and just connecting with them and finding resources that are online now with technology. It's just been, it's a good thing. So I'm excited about today.
That's a great encouragement. And also, even just to note that in the past, you have led a connection group for moms
Yes.
that deal with special needs. And so if you are a mom out there that has has that and would love to connect with other moms, there is opportunity for that. So
Yes.
maybe even feel free to reach out to Madonna if you have questions about that.
Yes, and
So,
just for you to know, there are 2 other mothers also from some of my other ones that have now started their own, have also grouping, right, Sarah? I think there's,
Yes, yeah,
that
we
sound
have
right?
had the last several sessions, we've had at least one group for moms with kids with special needs. So
Yeah,
it's a need, and there is space for you in Velvet Ashes connection groups.
yeah, and it's been great because we've stayed connected after the groups are over with. So that's been a really great thing, just to resources and just encouraging each other in that way. So great thing that you guys have started. So anyway, thanks for having me today.
yeah, no, I love that encouragement of, just because you have a child with special needs does not mean that you have to relocate back to the States,
Right.
that you can still potentially, not for everybody, but you can potentially
Right,
find
right.
the help you need where you're at. So thank you so much for being here to speak
Mm.
into that and to be encouragement for that. I appreciate
Mm.
that. Jenny Lee, tell us about yourself and how you're connected to Velvet Ashes in this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really fun to be here to talk about this. It's something we even just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we're dealing with some things. So medical overseas is a big deal, and it's good to be able to talk about it with other people. My name's Jenny Lee. I'm a writer for Velvet Ashes, and have led some connection groups too, which I love. My husband and I live here in Senegal, West Africa, and we have 3 teenage daughters. We lived in France our first year overseas and had some medical there, which is very interesting, having medical done in Europe. And then we've lived in Senegal for about 5 years. We moved overseas knowing my middle daughter and I are both gluten-free, so we knew that was going to be challenging, having some food needs overseas. And then before, when we were still pastoring, I started having some neurological MS type symptoms. So we knew that was a possibility at some point. I had not been diagnosed over our first term, but did need to because of symptoms I was having. We flew from Senegal, West Africa to South Africa, which is a very, very long way. I don't think people realize till they make that trip how big Africa really is. But I have a neurologist in South Africa that I love, and some other doctors that I've seen there. So navigating that whole, how do you find a doctor? How do you get your medical insurance for travel? All of that is just, every time I go to plan a trip, it's like a deep breath. Okay, step by step, we can do this. I was diagnosed when we were on home assignment with MS, so officially diagnosed, then trying to figure out how to get those medications, which are extremely difficult to get in the States, let alone inexpensive, let alone into the developing world. So just trying to figure out that. And then just living here with normal teenage girl, getting to the doctor kind of things. So that's how I'm connected to the topic, I guess. And I just love talking to other women going through the same things. So.
And you actually have some resources because you do write for Velvet Ashes and you write on your personal blog about this topic. And so, I would encourage people to also look up Jenny Lee and her writings and things to be encouraged even after this about this topic as well. So.
And we'll post some of those in the comments so people can find them.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
And as we were talking earlier, we were noting that we are straddling the sun here. We have Madonna, who is getting ready to say goodnight, but Monica is in Seattle and got up really early to join us today. So Monica, we really appreciate you, and we would love it if you would just tell us, a little bit about yourself and how you're connected to this topic in Velvet Ashes.
Yeah, hi, I'm Monica. I'm double fisting coffee and tea right now. I'm so happy I can be here. My name's Monica, and I'm also one of the writers for Velvet Ashes. I'll try to summarize a little bit, but I actually became connected through Velvet Ashes during a sabbatical about 5 years ago back in the States. And that was a really neat time for me to get connected and see what other women go through with life overseas. And then my first post that I ever submitted or guest posted for was regarding postpartum depression, which I had gone through personally while overseas in China. So a little bit going back, I'm a nurse, and I got my nursing degree in 1998 from Southern California, and worked in the States for a little bit. And then my husband and I moved overseas to Kenya. We lived in central Kenya in an area called Tharaka. And I like to joke with people that we basically experienced every tropical disease you can imagine. Both between my husband and I, we had malaria 7 times in 2 years, and a multitude of other illnesses. So that was being baptized by fire there. And then we transitioned to rural southern China, and we were in China for 10 years. We have 3 kids. And with our first, we had a similar experience as Madonna. Our youngest got community acquired pneumonia, and we had to evacuate him. We almost lost him. He was cared for in Thailand. And then my second child, my daughter, had multiple medical needs that needed to be addressed in both the States, but eventually in Hong Kong is where we ended up getting her excellent care. So besides just from a personal standpoint, I also have a chronic illness that I've had since I was 7. I have a form of rheumatoid arthritis, and I've had to navigate that overseas with medications and diet. And then as a nurse, I've walked medical journeys with many, many people, locals and expats. I've done medical orientations for new arrivals and what to bring, what to be prepared for, how to navigate the local medical system, how to access same language speakers in your host country who are medical providers, nurses, doctors, therapists. And so really started to grow my network of resources and continue, even though I'm stateside now and working in an international community clinic here in Seattle. I often wake up in the morning and I have WeChats or WhatsApps from friends overseas who are like, hey, can you remind me who's this person I can connect with? Or we're in the village right now and this is going on. So there's that side. And then also just a huge thing for me is just advocating for local folks who have medical needs. Sometimes we're put in those positions, whether we're professionals or not. And so how to sort of navigate that carefully as you strive to serve the people you're working with, because a lot of it is with medical.
Absolutely. You know, I feel like when I look at all that we have represented today, we have, you know, people that are caring for children, people that are caring for themselves, people that, you know, actually have the experience and the tools to help others. And so I'm really just so grateful for this just well-rounded team that we have together today to just talk all sides of this topic. And I kind of don't even know where to start because I feel like there's so many things. But I think it's a scary topic no matter if you live in a developed place overseas or you live in an undeveloped place. It can be an overwhelming topic. I think when we lived in South Sudan and my husband got malaria really badly, we not only didn't have access to doctors, but we couldn't cross the border to get access to doctors only when it was open. So in the morning, when my husband was really bad, I had to be the first one across the border. And our doctors, the only ones that I knew about, were an 8-hour drive away. And so we were driving through rush hour traffic in the capital of Uganda. And I actually got hit several times trying to make it to the hospital. When we finally pull in, the hood of our truck falls off. And I don't even care because it's just like, I want to get there before the doctor leaves for the day. And so that may be a scenario for other people. It's like, I know that I'm choosing to live in a place where medical help is going to be far away, and getting there is even going to be an ordeal besides just finding it. How do you suggest for people that do live maybe separated from any medical advice that they would trust, how do you put together a team of people around you for those scenarios? Because it can't always be an 8-hour drive. Sometimes you need something that's a little bit closer than that. So what would you say to somebody that feels like they're isolated from that trusted advice that they would have?
I'll
I
hop
can go.
on.
Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jenny.
For me, it's just been listening. When my daughter just recently, she was dizzy and just not feeling well, and she just didn't look good. And I thought she really needs blood work, because we'd had some blood work done last fall, and I thought the same thing's kind of happening. We need to follow up on that. But I knew we couldn't get to Dakar very quickly. And I remembered a friend who'd said she'd gotten really good blood work. The lab was clean. They were very professional, done just right here close to us. So it was just like that thought popped in my head. I sent her a text. She told me where to go. And that morning we had the blood. I just walked in and told them what I wanted. I didn't even need a prescription or doctor's note or anything. And they did all this blood work, and we got the tests back the next day. And so I was able to review them with a couple doctors that we know, send them the pictures of it. So I think to build that network, you have to just listen to the conversations happening, even if you don't need it right then. Ask really good questions. If someone's talking about, they went into this doctor or this thing, listen, pay attention, make notes, because you'll be surprised when you need it and what's available really close that maybe you didn't know was there.
So Monica, when Jenny Lee mentioned needing to know what kind of lab work to get, because in a lot of other countries, you don't have to have a prescription to get the medication that you're requesting or, lab work done. So how do you help yourself become educated to know, how do I decipher these things and how do I know what to ask for?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of tough because as a nurse, I felt like I had all that training going into it. And then when I got to Kenya, I realized I actually didn't know anything. And everything I'd been doing in the States is like, we have all the pumps and the machines and the meds. But I received great medical orientation during our orientation time in East Africa. And they had a nurse come in who was part of our organization. And she went with me to a chemist, the pharmacy in Nairobi. And she basically just started pulling things off the shelf. And then she sat down with me and she, wrote on the boxes, when you get malaria, take this. When you get, a GI infection or an amoeba, take this. And I was familiar with the medications, but I didn't, I didn't know how and when to use them all. And so at that point in time, we could only use CB radio. There was no cell service or anything. So we had one of those like old school radios at a translation center. And so that was kind of my access. But what really hit it off for me, what helped me a lot in all of these scenarios, and this is even for when I moved to the UK for a few months, because that's an interesting, going through the NHS was an interesting experience, is trying to find local connections who are medical in nature. So even if you're in a rural area, is there a village clinic that can do the malaria blood test? Or is there a clinic that can do a IV, down in the other valley, and you'd be surprised. We've even found that in rural China, and trying to find those connections with people who have that knowledge in the community, whether it's a midwife, a village doctor, or even somebody from another city who has made themselves available to be a resource for you. So I always encourage people to educate themselves on what possible illnesses they could encounter, what medications to have available, and who to call or when to know how to take them. My go-to for years was Where There Is No Doctor. I think everybody's probably pretty familiar with that book. And I think it's still useful today, especially if you're in an isolated situation. But whether you're medical or not, I really encourage folks when they've come to the areas where I've been living and where I've done medical orientations to make connections with folks that, as they're going through their language learning, as they're building relationship in their work, to find out what they do and where to go, because you can't always evacuate all the time. We were in a situation once with our son. He was in the middle of appendicitis, and the local government had all of our passports because we were in the middle of getting things renewed and going through all of our passport work, we couldn't leave the country. And so he did have a traditional appendectomy at a local hospital in a small county town. And it was probably the last thing in the world I ever wanted, but he survived and he's great. And, you know, it was a humbling experience for me to trust the people that I worked alongside, instead of saying, well, I'm going to get him out of here, which would have been my preference, to be honest. But in the end, it worked out fine. So just building those connections is really important in an evacuation or emergency situation.
One of the things that comes to my mind when you're talking about medications is, you know, sometimes it's hard to even understand what you're getting, because you might know something in the States as this, or where you're from as this. And when you go over there, it's maybe available, but it's called something else. And not only that, but you have medications that are made in countries all over the world. And, you know, have you found that it's good to ask people, where do you trust? What are there brands that you trust? Are there places where you trust medicine to be made from over others? You know, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, one of the first things I've done when I've lived in different locations, and this goes for different parts of South Asia too, is try to find like the standard drugs that, you know, and translate them, and then, you know, have example boxes of those when I've worked with teams coming in, like new teams and orientees, and say, you know, if you have to go to Thailand, this is what the box is going to look like. It's, you know, and this is called paracetamol. It's not called Tylenol. You know, and so trying to help with that. I have in China in particular, I worked with this great friend who had been over the years building up phrases in not just like how to ask questions, medical questions, but what the potential answers might be in, you know, the Chinese language written, but then also the alphabet, the pinyin is what it's called, and then the English. And that was really helpful because you could actually just show it to somebody if you were still at the beginning of language learning. So with medications, obviously, if folks already have established illnesses or medical needs, you want to bring what you can, but then to learn right away what, and I mean, I'll let Madonna and Jenna talk to that from their experiences as well, how to get those medications that you need.
Madonna, do you find that you've been able to find medications that you need for your daughter there, or have you had to connect the dots through other ways?
Well, when she was on the feeding tube, they did not make the new tubes here in Taiwan. So, but the doctors are really great in the US. They would just say they sent me when we left, like, I don't know, 4 or 5, and they showed it very easy to change out. And so they said, when you get low, just let your mom know and we'll send her some more and she can mail them to you. So that, but we did have some instances where we were like, oh no, they've broken and now we're down to nothing. And we did find one in Hong Kong. Like, we just had to start asking. I think, you know, Monica, you know, said, just start listening where people buy things. And so we were able to find some friends who were able to call around and find, and we did. I mean, it was very expensive, but we did find one. Now she's been off of her feeding tube for about 10 years now. So medical wise, we really feel like we're in a good place where I'm not looking for medicines or medical, you know, things that she's got to have. So yeah.
You know, do you, Jenna Lee and Madonna, you both have spoken about, you know, a medical team around you. How have you found, because you are kind of long-term where you're at right now, do you find that it's important to still have your primary advice coming from a voice maybe in your passport culture, or are you transitioning to try to find that primary voice somewhere in your host culture?
I don't know that I've found that balance yet. I really thought I wanted to, as Monica said, I preferred, especially being diagnosed with an illness, to have my main medical coming from the States. But I've also learned there's a lot of requirements on what they're allowed to say to me over the phone, what they're allowed to recommend to me over the phone, especially if they haven't seen me in a year or 18 months. can be very difficult. So it's actually been easier to communicate with my doctors in South Africa or even here. They'll just give me their phone number and I can send them a WhatsApp. And my doctor in South Africa, I can send him a WhatsApp with what I need or what I'm thinking, or even for medicines, if I'm in a pharmacy and I'm confused about what I'm getting or what their dosage they're telling me is different from what I read on Google, what I looked online or what my nurse friend said. He's been just great. So I don't know that there's one way to do that, to find medical care that you just stick with, because when somebody's sick and you need something, you need to find the best resource you can get at the time with the best information. And so it's a balance of all of those things for me.
I remember when I was trying to navigate this with my children overseas, and I felt like I was questioning everything. Like I didn't know, can I trust what you're telling me? And so I became like a researcher, and I was like researching, okay, they're telling me my kid has this, but do they really have this? And I'm like peeling through, and it kind of became this normal that you begin to research and you begin to become an expert yourself on things. And I remember when we came back and I took my kids to the orthodontist, and I felt for the first time that I wasn't questioning what he was saying. And I just started crying in the orthodontist office. And this poor guy had no idea what to do with me. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on. But you do kind of feel like you have to understand and know what you're doing, especially as a parent. If I'm going to give my child this medication, I want to trust that what they're telling me is actually what it is, and I want to know what I'm giving them. And so do you find that there's places that you go to research things, or are there things, because when you type in some things in the internet and it then terrifies you, and so do you encourage that researching on your own, or is it something that you would encourage them finding somebody else to run those questions by?
I would say both. I think having someone like if you're already dealing with a present illness and you have a stateside physician or provider that has said, hey, you can be in touch with me. I think it's good to have, like we had a pediatrician here stateside for all those years that she's like, anytime, day or night, you can email me. And then we kind of weaned off of her over the years. We didn't need her as much because we started finding those people where we were living. It's tough because I always tell people, like, don't Google your symptoms because it just leads you down these crazy rabbit trails. But at the same time, internet resources can be really helpful. And so I think it's hard when you're not feeling well or you're having symptoms of something or you're in pain to just depend on what you're reading off the internet. And so whatever you're doing, if you are online looking things up or whatever, I think it's important to have a real life human you can bounce those things off of to kind of bring you back to what those possibilities could potentially be, because it can take you down rabbit trails. For me, I have found that the internet has been helpful for me in certain situations where I didn't have another go-to resource. But in most cases, it kind of just made me more anxious, to be honest with you. So I don't know. It's kind of a fine balance.
I was just going to say, I agree. I try to stick to like Cleveland Clinic or Mayo Clinic, like places that I absolutely know are going to have good advice. And then I read what I can, and I try to stick to the simplest things. Like when it says the most common things is this, this, and this, that's what I try to stick with, because if you let yourself go down the most serious, it could be cancer or tumor, then you get scared and freaked out. And generally, we all know we go to the doctor and he's like, it's just this, so that's what I try to do to myself. But the internet's very helpful to find pictures of rashes or the temperature of, if you have this, your temperature is normally this much, or, the internet's very, very helpful. If you're standing in the pharmacy line and you need to look up certain things, it's very helpful. But having a person that you can talk to and bounce things off of is better.
And just to add on to that, I think it's really good. I don't know how all organizations work, but I know with the one that we were with and several others would have like a medical handbook for folks that were kind of pertinent to their country or region, because you don't always have the internet and you don't always have cell phone access. And so I think if you can have some sort of manual that kind of gives you like lists of common illnesses, how to treat things, very simply, when to call the nurse, when to go to the doctor. Those sort of triaging sort of handbooks are really important. So I always encourage people to ask their organizations, what resources do you have for those of us moving to the field that will help me be able to navigate medical needs when and if I cannot get in touch with a real life human or have access to the internet.
Sarah, I was getting ready to switch gears just a little bit. Are there any questions we can address before we do that?
Yeah, there are a couple questions. One is about insurance, and that can vary so much, but someone was just asking what thoughts you guys have on like travel insurance for medical things, if you have a package for insurance, or just any thoughts on what that looks like for you guys.
Madonna, have you had to deal
Yeah.
with that?
We in China, the organization we worked with had insurance in the States, but they also had like what they called an SOS insurance. So that's what for our medical evac, that's what they used for us to evacuate us out of the smaller city into a larger city with our daughter. Now we're in Taiwan, and Taiwan has a really, really good insurance and medical. So we have that. I get travel insurance when I go to the US or to other countries, but yeah,
So you don't keep up an insurance outside of what you would?
No,
Okay.
well, I wish we would have, but when we moved to Taiwan, our new organization didn't have one. And that was before all the other stuff. So, and what I have now is enough for the US because I can use it in the hospitals, and then I just come back here and I get reimbursed for whatever it would have cost us here. But
Okay.
so yeah, so I can't really say if people should get US or not get US, because where I'm at right now in Taiwan, they have such good insurance. It's very affordable. It's, and the medical system here is just really good. So
I feel like this insurance question is a big one because it's so expensive, and we chose to keep a insurance policy, and every month and every year it would go up, but yet where we lived, it was so cheap to get medical treatment. And so I felt like, why are we paying this every month when we just end up paying out of pocket where we're at and it's cheap? And our organization required it of us, and so we did have to keep it. And they kept saying, when that one thing happens, if you need that one thing. And I will say, for our family, my daughter ended up with an anorexia that caused her to be in a hospital for 3 months in the States. And the bill for that was close to $100,000, and our insurance covered it. And so that was the one thing that we were like, okay, thank you for making us have it. But it was every month and every year when that premium kept creeping up, it was like a wrestling with, all right, what do we do? Do we keep paying this when we know we don't have to pay very expensive medical care? But Jenny, what about you? What have you guys found that works for your family?
Yeah, we have insurance through our organization, and it covers us stateside, almost like our policy would have before we lived overseas. But it also has a special, I don't know what to call it, a special program, I guess, for when you're living overseas. And so we pay out of pocket, but then we turn things in, it gets reimbursed. And then the travel gets a bit tricky if you don't go through the right department, or it's emergency, but really not emergency, or that can get really tricky. So you want to make sure you know how your insurance works. If they're going to cover your hotel and rental car, flights even, because the insurance companies know it's cheaper for you to seek care overseas too. So a lot of times they're willing to help you stay overseas, or even call and say, I need this surgery, where's the best place to go, and they'll help you figure out where you should go. A lot of them will help you find out where to stay and all of that, and connect you with doctors. So there are really good programs in overseas insurance. I really just have experience with ours, but so far we've been happy with it.
Okay. That's really helpful. No, that's a huge hurdle that everybody has to decide for themselves, I guess. But Sarah, was there another question?
Yeah, just quick. Is there any kind of online resource for like the names of drugs in other countries?
Yeah, Monica, there's like, because I know there's like the nurse's medical handbook that you could, look up, or I don't even know what it's called. You know what it's called, but where you're looking up drugs and it
Yeah.
tells you what they are. But yeah, is there some type of resource like that?
Yeah, actually there's, I should have probably been a little bit more prepared to have those ready, but yes, there are those resources out there. And you often can find them like on expat websites for certain countries. People will have like a section on there for medical that are like common drugs and their names in the local language, the vernacular, and in English. So there's that. Like I said, for for the areas that I've lived in, that was kind of one of my first things I was trying to find out, like, how can I know what these drugs are? But there are some online resources. You can often just put a name in and then the country or the language next to it, and it might automatically translate it, but you have to be careful. And that's why having like a local friend say yes or no, who might know if it's a local doctor or nurse, they can guide you in that. So and again, I don't know how all organizations work, but I know for us, we always had medical people in our region from our organization. So like for myself and two other nurses for China, for our China group, we would field all of these questions from folks. And so that was a huge resource for me when I first moved to Kenya, with the nurse that kind of helped me navigate medications and the healthcare system there. So I don't know how that is for other folks, but if there's any sort of medical orientation, usually they'll have some sort of, little handbook or paper, document that at least can give you some initial guidance.
So if there's anybody actually on the Facebook Live, or you're watching this and you have something that you're like, oh yeah, this is great, this is a great resource, just put that in the chat so that you can share that with people. And those little tricks that help make your decision easier about what drugs to use, or any of that. Just share the resources, and so that we can all benefit from that. One of the things that I can imagine, if I saw this topic pop up and I wanted to listen to it, maybe I'm concerned that I'm just going to be diagnosed with something, I'm having some symptoms, or I've just been to the doctor and they've told me that I'm pregnant and my child more than likely has Down syndrome, and so I'm serving overseas and I'm trying to wrestle with, what do I do? Do I stay? Do I go? And I can imagine that's a scary time when you are faced with, where do I continue living based on the knowledge that I have about this medical condition for my child or myself. Talk a little bit about women that are facing that right now, I look at this decision that I have to make and I don't know, how do I make this decision wisely? What factors do you encourage them to walk through and talk through with that?
I would say for me, just based off of what you said, I've had 2 kids overseas. I asked other women first. That was my first thing, is somebody who's gone before me down that path. Where have you gone for medical care locally? Where have you gone for medical care regionally? When you had your kid overseas, what was your experience? Do you have any recommendations? Do you have any warnings? So my first go-to, just not even as a nurse, but just as a normal person, was, who can I ask that has done this, who's had to make those decisions? And then just start gathering the information that's there, being aware of my own physical issues. Like, for example, we lived in China. but I had 2 kids in Thailand because my blood type is very rare. And if I had needed a blood transfusion where I lived in China, it would be a bad situation. And so even my Chinese doctor who walked with me through my pregnancies didn't want me to deliver in China. And so that was confirmation for me. But then it was going the next step and finding out, well, how do I navigate the healthcare system in Northern Thailand? And then finding those resources through other connections. People will be surprised how big the network can be in these areas all over the world. Women who want to help each other have their babies, or when their kids are going through tough stuff. Hey, I've been there too. So it might not be somebody within your organization or your team, but there might be another woman who knows exactly what you're going to be going through. And that's where I recommend starting.
Monica, Jennalee, with your, personally, you've gone through this. You've had to make that decision of, hey, I'm counting the cost and I'm choosing to walk through this. How did you make that decision to stay in light of children or yourself facing health issues?
When the doctor first said, yes, this is MS, we're diagnosing, it was just a lot of talking about it. Jeremy and I talked about it. We talked about it with my parents, got medical advice. I really found the same thing that Madonna said earlier, that the doctor was very supportive. Yes, there's no reason you can live here, you can live there. As long as you can get the medications that you need and you feel comfortable staying where you are, there's no reason to uproot your life and make these big changes. So I really found no one thought we were crazy for wanting to come back to West Africa. I mean, a little bit maybe, but they maybe think that anyway. I would say it's easier to make that decision for me than it would be, I think, to make that for one of my girls. Knowing the challenges of what it's like to be sick overseas, these decisions aren't easy. They're going to be person by person, situation by situation. And I don't think any one of us can say you should stay or you should go. It really is, what are you comfortable with? What is your doctor saying? And what do you feel like, what are you comfortable with doing? And what's God asking of you? And how have you seen God move in the past? And he's going to move in the future in that same way. So God's been faithful, and we take it one step at a time. It's never off the table to have to go back to the States or move where there's better medical, or I could get medicines easier or tests easier. That's, we're talking about it all the time. I don't know that it's a firm decision, but for right now it's working, and we made that decision.
Yeah. Madonna, what about you? How was that decision for you?
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier, we talked to all of the physicians and the therapists, and nobody thought we were crazy when we decided to go back to China. And then we did it a year by year. Our organization was really very gracious with us and just said, yes, we understand. So we kind of evaluated it every 6 months or 3 months and till the end of the year and be like, okay, what could we do another year? And when she was 2 and was really, the speech therapist in Hong Kong was like, she really needs to have it more regularly. We started looking for speech therapy in English in China. And at the time, the head, I don't know who it was, but whoever was the head said, we're not there yet. And so we just started praying about it. And we really wanted to stay in Asia. Our oldest is typical, but our 3rd child is adopted from China. So we really wanted to stay in the Asian community so that our youngest especially, would really understand where her culture, that culture, and get to know that. And we just really like my husband grew up in Taiwan, so just that's home to him too, and it had become home for me. And so we looked at Singapore. My husband was working as an educator. He was a principal at an international school. So we looked at Singapore and Hong Kong, and nothing was open, but something opened up in Taiwan, and they happened to have the English speech therapy at the time. And so it was a really, just a very good directive that our time wasn't over yet. In China it was, but not living overseas. So yeah, I think just talking to people and and getting to know what
What
works
I
for you.
what I love about this is that it's a challenge, but it's opening doors for new relationships because it's causing you to ask questions and to ask advice and to enter into someone else's struggle and pain as they have walked through that. And you're building relationships. It's nothing is wasted, and it's opening up a whole new door for ministry and growth. And I love that it doesn't have to be an end to a ministry. It can be a beginning
That's
as
right.
well.
Yeah, and I was just thinking too, we've talked with several families who've looked at coming to Taiwan, and some of them have come and some of them haven't. And the ones that haven't doesn't mean they failed or they're not good enough or whatever. I think God had a different plan for them, and they're going to have ministry. It's just going to look a little different than maybe what they had planned or where they had planned. So I think I want to encourage, women in that too, that just because you have to go back or um, that have to is not the word. It's God's directing you to go back and he's using your medical need or whatever to put you in a place where he wants you. And I think that's the one thing we've got to keep in mind when we're looking at that too.
I think it's also worth noting that, there are women out there that might also be struggling with, I'm having trouble getting pregnant, or I'm having trouble, accessing the care, and my choice to stay may be my choice to not get pregnant or not, because, and there are sacrifices that people are making, and not that they want that, but recognizing that the care that they might receive is going to be different. And there's counting the cost in some of those ways as well. But Sarah, before I want to give everybody a chance to just say, these are my top advice for you, or this is my please don't do this, type of thing. So be thinking about that. But are there any other things that have popped up before we kind of make that turn into best advice and please don't do this?
No, there's lots of discussion happening. The insurance question was really big. So thank you guys for taking the time to address that. And several people are sharing the resources they know about. So that's really great. And several of you sent some links to me ahead of time. And so those are in the comments as well for people.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, Monica, you mentioned that, you did this kind of like when people come to the field or they're getting ready to go, what are the medical things that you need to know? And I think, maybe we would all, looking back on, okay, when we're arriving, this is the best advice I could give you for this. So what comes to the top of your mind? Monica, I would start with you just because I think you've had this conversation before.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many things. I actually have like lists of documents and PowerPoints that we would do with people. And then just notes that I've taken over the years. But, in general, I think the biggest thing that popped out to me is I really encourage people to keep a health journal. They might not feel like they're, prone to sickness or that they're an unhealthy person necessarily, or that they don't have health issues, I should say. But I do encourage people to, come, obviously they'll have their immunizations done, but beyond that, any past illnesses that are significant, if they've had any surgeries, and they've just jot that down in their journal. And then as they're living overseas, potentially as things pop up for themselves or their kids, they just want to sort of track those things, when they happened, what sort of symptoms they had, and not to be overly obsessive about it, but just notes on these things. And, maybe picking up on their child is coughing a lot. Well, maybe it's asthma and their kid has never been diagnosed with asthma, but they're kind of tracking that. Or, I always feel like I end up getting sick or vomiting after I eat this particular food. Well, it could be that you've developed an MSG allergy or you're lactose intolerant and you didn't know it before. I developed a really bizarre allergy when I lived in Kenya, and I had to start tracking the things that I was eating because it was related to that. So I would really encourage people just from day one to keep that journal, because if you do end up going back to your passport country, you have it all there for your physician stateside or wherever you're coming from. That's one thing. The other thing is to really understand how your insurance works. And if you do have big medical needs, to know how to navigate that. I wanted to add on the insurance thing, a lot of people may not know that their home sending groups or their universities might have alumni chapters that have specific kind of funds for medical needs overseas. I discovered that strangely enough. And I've also discovered that hospitals, like in Hong Kong, they took off a discount from the main price tag that we had with our daughter's 2 surgeries. So that's one just little thing I want to add there. It doesn't hurt to ask what other options there are.
They took it off because of a university that you attended?
No, the hospital, we just asked if they offered discounts for people
Just
that make a
ask.
certain income. Yeah.
Ah,
And then I found out that the alumni chapter from the university where I went to had an alumni chapter in Hong Kong. And they found out about our situation through another former classmate of mine and helped with that what our insurance didn't cover. So
that's great.
doesn't hurt to ask. Or find out about those things if they're an option. The other things I would just add is to bring some supplies with you. You don't need to like overpack supplies, but see if there's a point person in the country where you're going to that can offer you medical supply advice or what medications you might need. And then, on a more personal side of things, and having been a nurse overseas, to really, as you go into another culture and you're navigating the medical system there, it can be really easy to start to feel judgmental or resentful or critical towards the way you see things going. And in some cases, you might be surprised and be like, wow, I've never thought about doing it that way. And it really resonates with you. But to really try to, and this is hard when you're sick or you're in a panic, to let those people be your guide. Let the doctors be your guide and the nurses, and you might have a negative experience, but you could have that same negative experience in your passport country. So it can be difficult to walk into these challenging medical situations where you might not understand the language or the culture, and how dealing with medical care is a totally cultural issue as well. Sharing knowledge, withholding information, not giving you the entire picture. There's all kinds of things that happen in different cultures with seeking medical care. I really encourage people to make learning about the medical system part of their language learning, because it will never hurt to have that. And so I think trying to enter into those cross-cultural medical situations with an open mind and open heart can really lead to unexpected blessings. And it's not always going to be perfect or what we feel is a certain standard, but then you might be surprised at the things you learn and that are important takeaways in your own life with your medical care, your kids, family members, teammates, so on.
Absolutely. And I love that idea of just grabbing a local friend that you can lean on more, that can help you, and then your relationship grows as they help you navigate and pour into you, and they're able to bless you through that and build that relationship. And even at the medical journal that you were taking, as I think about, we're the type of people that push through, and so you kind of just like put stuff on the back burner and think, I don't, that's fine, I can deal with that. Or our spouses. So, maybe even keeping a medical journal for your spouse as you're like noticing he's complaining about this all the time, or he's, rubbing his shoulder right here all the time. I don't know. But, if your spouse isn't going to do that because they just push through, but maybe keeping note for them of, hey, I've noticed the last few times you've gone to the village and eaten this, you've gotten this rash. I don't know. But, things like that. So maybe not even just for you, but as the mom and caretaker of your family, you are keeping that in mind for your whole family as well. But yeah, Madonna, Jenna Lee, what advice would you have?
Well, I'll just kind of piggyback on what Monica was saying. I remember when we first moved to Taiwan and I had to get Mate into therapy. There was a lady who, she was actually a nurse a Taiwanese lady. And so she basically taught me the system. She said, I will go with you 3 times. The first time she walked me through, go and line up. Here's where you pay, and here's where you get your whatever, and the steps. She said, the next time I will I'll walk beside you, but you have to do it. And the third time I'm going to be behind you, like off in the distance. And then after that, you're on your own. And it was the best thing. She was the bridge on teaching me how the healthcare system works. Now, each hospital is a little bit different, of course, but they're all generally the same. And so I think that was probably the most helpful thing for me with the medical system here in Taiwan, was just having that bridge person teach me how it works.
That's great. That's great advice. Denali, what about you?
Yeah, to go with the medical journal, having had medical since we've been overseas in France, in the States, and South Africa, here, realizing a lot of the world doesn't do like medical records the way the States does. So they may give you your X-ray, they may give you your work, they give you your MRI, and keeping those things. So you have them if you end up, we thought we'd be back in South Africa this summer to see my neurologist, and my husband needs shoulder surgery. But of course we're not there. And I did not grab my MRI from last fall because I thought we'll be back next summer. And so if I end up needing to go to the States, I'm missing an MRI. So remember to grab those things when you get medical care, so you have them to keep that flow of your care the same, even if the doctor changes your records. Now machines are different and all that too, and then just expect the unexpected. My daughter needed an X-ray, and we walked in, and there were exposed wires, and it was very, very scary, but she got on, they did her X-rays, and we took them back to the doctor, and everything was fine. So you just never know. You never know what's going to happen. Just be gracious and go with the process sometimes, while still advocating for yourself, of course, but just recognizing it's a different medical system. They do things differently. The things are going to be different, and sometimes that's okay. Yeah, you're overseas and you're getting an experience sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the thing that I take away the most from all of this is just talk to your community. Don't be afraid to broaden your community and ask those questions and search out those, because just looking at what's represented right here, there are women in all sorts of situations who have faced many things and challenges and have navigated this before. So just talk, ask questions. Don't be quiet about it. If you need to find answers from somebody, there's probably somebody who has been through that and who can help you with that. And that's the beauty of this community. That's the reason Velvet Ashes was started in the first place, is, hey, we're all going through this and we're so disconnected. How can we be a connection? And there's organizations outside of Velvet Ashes that are great connectors as well. And so, don't be afraid to try to be an advocate and find those connections for people that are doing that. And, if you're watching this and you have a great resource or connection that you'd love to share with the community, put that in the chat. And if we feel like that's a great option and we get that out there in a broader community as well, we will be sure to publicize that. We do have what we call the Global Issues Facebook page, where we're able to put more resources like that. So if you don't belong to that and you would like to have that conversation or ask that question, please feel free to join that Facebook group and just ask your questions and start those conversations with ladies who are dealing with all sorts of things, and put those resources in there as well. Sarah, have we been able to address most of the questions? Are there things that we need to address later on in the chat, in the comments?
Yeah, there's still some discussion happening in the comments. So if you ladies have time to hop on and just answer some of those questions at some point, that would be great. And just to kind of see, there are a lot of people who have expressed how much they have appreciated this conversation. So yeah, thank you for your willingness to be honest and vulnerable and share your thoughts.
I echo that. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for giving of your time and just being that resource and helping to just get this conversation started and maybe giving people confidence to go ask the questions that they need to ask. And we want to continue having the conversation with you. We've got 2 more summer lives planned. Next week, we're going to talk about singleness and how does that affect your decision to be and go and stay on the field, and dating. How do you do that well when you're on the field? We value having a conversation about that because we know so many people are thriving and asking questions about that. So join us next Thursday for our next summer live about dating and singleness overseas. So ladies, thank you so much for joining. We're so grateful for those of you that hopped on this live today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.